Last week, I built a custom renegade Ogryn. I created a narrative around him, envisioning some odd features that would lead to a great deal of prejudice and mockery at the hands of other Ogryns and members of the Imperial Guard. One day he snaps, lashing out violently and tearing apart those he was supposed to protect. Allied to no one but himself, I see him taking up a grenade launcher and blasting apart infantry lines before charging into his former tormentors, smashing them with his slab shield. Now it is time to start painting this miniature. I have visions of pale white flesh with yellow and green tones to it, something pale and cruel, suggesting that he spent all of his time in a claustrophobic and dark environment, caged and cramped like an animal, and ridiculed until finally being unleashed upon enemies of the Imperium. But things go awry. This is Cursed Crusader Arts. To start with, I select 4 main colours to build up the flesh tones. This includes Deathguard Green, Ogryn Camo, Nurglin Green, and Zandri Dust. I started out by using a base coat of Deathguard Green, which would act as the deepest shadows of the flesh. The idea here was to treat the colour of the skin similar to orcs, but instead of going into deeper greens, I would move the other way into paler yellows and whites. The paint is thinned down and I apply at least 2 layers to ensure that I have proper coverage and cover the black undercoat. After this is done, I apply a layer of Ogryn Camo, covering most of the flesh but leaving the Deathguard Green visible in the deepest parts. I apply the same method using Nurglin Green, but I end up leaving the Zandri Dust out as it has too much yellow in it, which is ironic considering what is about to happen. With all the flesh painted onto the body and arms, I applied a wash of Reikland Flesh Shade. The idea here was to have a very pale flesh, but include warmer tones deep beneath the skin. However, I put too much on at once and got carried away by what I was seeing. The orange tones of the wash settled into the folds of the skin, completely obscuring the layers of work that I had just put in. But the outcome gave me an instant flashback to Fallout 3 Super Mutants. The style and palette of this game gives a very visceral view of the impacts of nuclear war, and I was suddenly inspired to continue painting this Ogryn based on the Super Mutant palette. Super mutants are generally green. However, in Fallout 3, a majority of this is concealed under a reddish-yellow hue. Perhaps this came from the layers of dust from the fallout and surrounding wasteland. Maybe it is from exposure to the sun, creating a kind of tan. Either way, this yellow tone is broken up by green and brown blotches, and I imitated this by using my brush to add small pools of pale tan green, occasionally rubbing at it gently to spread it around. This results in some brilliant tone variation throughout the skin, really giving the impression that this Ogryn has had a hard life. With the base of the skin complete, it was time to move on to the fabrics. On this, I deviate from the Super Mutant palette and choose to paint the trousers, shield flag, and straps a warm brown colour. I do this with Gorthor Brown, Deathclaw Brown, and Morfang Brown. Gorthor Brown provides a solid base layer that I can work with, as it is quite faded and neutral, not being too glaring. The plan here is to build the brown tones up to a similar warmth to the skin, unifying the 2 major components of the Ogryn to relate to the burning rage that is finally being unleashed on those around him. This would be followed by a solid layer of Mornfang Brown, only leaving the deepest layers the original colour. Deathclaw Brown is very bright, giving a nice muddy orange colour that complements the tones of the flesh quite nicely without deviating too much. The initial application of this paint makes it look a little too bright, but by the time it has dried, and with the help of some washes, that brightness is pulled back into cohesion with the rest of the paint. I also made sure that whilst applying this to the flag, I did it using vertical lines, showing the fabric flowing as it is buffeted by the winds and explosions throughout the battlefield. Whilst doing this, I took the time to use the Deathclaw Brown on all of the bones. I wanted these bones to match the rest of the Ogryn, so I felt that this base colour would be a great start for them. The bones were then highlighted with Zandri dust. This would start to bring in more of the bleached bone colours, separating it from the leather and other brown fabrics on the miniature. Right now it doesn't look like much, and even less after a wash, but next week I'll be working on the highlights and all of the work done now will pay off. I went back to the Raglan Flesh shade, using it to push back all of the brown tones. This wash also helped to redefine the folds in the fabric and use the red tones in it to complement the browns, making them seem much warmer. I then gave the flesh another wash, but this time with Seraphim Sepia, which is more yellow instead of red, and this was applied quite heavily again, but it pushes back all of the green that we added earlier, making it look like there are different tones or maybe bruises or something similar. This unification of the skin will also help when I add layers to it next week. The final part of the miniature to paint are the metal components. I wanted the majority of this to appear unpainted, so a solid layer of lead belcher was applied all over the metal parts, including the slab shield, metal boot plates, armour and a grenade launcher. This was reinforced with a layer of iron breaker. This metal should look quite beaten by the end of the process, although hindsight tells me that maybe I could have cut up the slab shield a little bit more. With the main metal paints applied, I referred back to the Fallout 3 super mutants, and took some time looking at the different pieces of metal and rubber that they used to protect themselves. The beaten metal had small blotches of blues and yellows in it, likely to suggest reflections of sunlight. I decided to implement this into the miniature by using the same method that I had when using the green washes on the flesh. To accomplish this, I used Thunderhawk Blue and Krieg Khaki. Some of it was applied directly from the pot, and other parts were watered down on the wet palette, giving variations in the concentration of pigments. And I also tried to focus more of the Krieg Khaki to the top of the slab shield as it is angled upwards. I washed the metal with Nuln oil. This would help to bring the paint back to the same level as the brown leathers and green flesh, but deprive it of the warm reds and yellows that I had previously used. This helps to ensure that the blues and yellows that were just added are not drowned out entirely by the tones that are too hot for it. The Nuln oil also helps to add an industrial feel to the metal, and adding more weight to the cold hard steel of the slab shield to make it appear much heavier and give more credit to the Ogryn's bulging muscles. With the base metal completed, I found that there was far too much silver, especially on the shield, which is supposed to be the main focal point, so I needed another colour involved to help break it up a little. I decided to add some cooler tones to the miniature and reinforce the bits of blue that we had already added. I took some more Thunderhawk Blue and added it to some of the diagonal and vertical lines on the slab shield. To unify the miniature, I added the same blue to details such as the stripes on the shoulder pad, the grenades, and some detailed trim on the grenade launcher. One last thing was some of the other fabrics that I hadn't yet painted. I decided not to have black boots, and I needed a good colour for the pouch on the Ogryn's belt. I eventually decided to mix Abaddon Black and Eshin Grey. Using this as a base layer, I added lighter layers to this by adding more Eshin Grey to the mix until it reached a colour I was quite happy with. I also used the brightest mixture on the blue that I had painted onto the shield and armour plates. At this point, I decided to paint the Imperial Guard helmet in the same way as the armour plates and grenades, as it made sense that all of the uniform should match if this renegade Ogryn hasn't long yet turned against his former masters. One more layer of Dawnstone added a very bright grey colour to the fabrics and metals, but it also has a mild yellow tone to it, helping to bring the blues and greys closer to the browns and greens. Everything was starting to look more grey than blue, so I reinforced this with a layer of Guilliman blue glaze. The blue armour panels were now blue again, and the grey fabrics became more of a blue-grey colour, which was all then washed with Nuln Oil, pushing it back again to match the metals. This was the first of 2 parts detailing the paintwork for this Ogryn, and I hope you enjoyed it. The final piece will be revealed next week, so if you'd like to see that, subscribe and leave a comment. This Ogryn has taken a very different turn to what I expected, and I am excited to see what he'll look like when everything is complete.